Hey everybody, Gurmos here with some more Warthunder tank action. So, the closed beta continues to be developed at a very fast pace, and we have a lot of new things since my last tank video. A new tank set of course, but also a lot of changes to the gameplay. So one thing I want to talk about a bit are a few of those changes for realistic battle mode, and give a bit of feedback and my opinion on it. The other thing I want to take a look at, and will start with, is the manual gear shifting. At the last testing session on Saturday, I decided to switch to realistic controls and dedicate the session to get used to them. The IS-2 footage is still with automatic. In the rest of the footage in this video I use manual transmission control. Now, I first tested realistic controls when I first got access to the closed beta about 2 months ago. But that was of course in arcade mode, and I felt automatic suited arcade better. And I think now that is even more the case, since the agility of tanks got increased in arcade mode. But I play a realistic of course, so I decided to give it another try, and so far I like it. Now here's how it works, pretty simple. As you would expect, W is the accelerator and S is the brake, or whatever you choose to bind it to. And I have changed gear down and up, bound to Q and E. Clutch can be bound in the settings, but is not needed for changing gears. I assume it will be needed in simulator battles. In realistic that might be a bit overkill. Of course, after 2 months of playing the closed beta with automatic and years of World of Tanks, it needs a bit of time to get used to the manual gear shifting and the fact that you can't just hit S to drive backwards. So, since I only started using it last testing session, I am not perfect at it yet. But improving is only a matter of time until you unlearn the old system and are able to build up the necessary muscle memory to drive like you would with automatic. Now let's take a look at the advantages and disadvantages of driving as manual in the current version of the game. First of all, I think it is simply more fun and feels a lot more like you are actually driving a tank. Not everybody might agree with me here, but I for one want to feel like I drive a tank if I play a tank game. I don't want the tanks to feel like heavily armed go-karts. And for me, the manual gear changing just improves the impression of really being on the controls of a 40-ton tank. The next thing is that manual of course gives you a greater control over your speed. You can cap your speed at a lower level by simply not switching into a higher gear, so you can drive your tank at walking pace if you so choose. That is of course useful if you want to advance more careful, gives you more time to scan your surroundings, and you can fire faster after you stop than you would be able to when you brake from full speed. In some tanks you can almost shoot on the move if the terrain is not too rough at lower speeds. Also, if you want to drive a very short distance out of cover to take a shot, you can do the opposite, start at a too high gear. Your tank will have a harder time accelerating at first, and you come out of cover slower, which again leads to less bouncing after you stop and you can take your shot faster. On the flip side, as far as poor straight line acceleration go, the automatic is better. It will reach top speed faster on even terrain. However, that might also change once you get used to the manual control. With some training you might be able to match or even beat the automatic in straight line acceleration, but at the moment I can't do that. You can also improve the traverse speed of your tank, especially on sloped terrain, because the automatic often chooses a suboptimal gear to traverse. This advantage might disappear if changes to the AI automatic are made though. The same goes for driving in reverse. Currently you can reverse faster in tanks with multiple reverse gears, because the AI at the moment does not use all reverse gears. That will be fixed in the future though, so it is a temporary advantage. Also, not all tanks have the correct amount of gears yet, so if you see me using a gear the tank did not have, that's why. Again, this will be fixed of course. Overall, it's hard to give a final verdict yet, since I don't have that much experience with manual control yet. But I like it. I think it's more fun to drive the tank this way, and currently it gives you an edge in certain situations, though the number of those situations will be reduced over time for reasons already stated. I hope that enough advantages remain that manual stays a viable option. I like it if extra effort on behalf of the player is rewarded. I will keep testing this, and I even think about digging out my old pedals from my old racing wheel and use that for accelerator and braking, though I might have to wait a bit till they are proper access. Now let's move on to some changes to realistic battle mode. The rangefinder in realistic has been removed completely, so hitting the target with the first shot at long ranges takes a little bit more effort. There is no real range-finding reticle yet, but of course currently the combat ranges are most of the time not that far, and ranges up to 600 meters are not that hard to judge, and you can usually guess them well enough to hit right away. And above that there are a few things you can use to improve your chances for a hit on the first try. For example, you can use the grid of the minimap to get a somewhat accurate range to the target. Another thing you can do is to use the elevation scale as a makeshift range-finding reticle. It is of course not meant for that, but if you just measure in a private game how far a standard target like a T-34 is away when it fills the space between the 0 meter and the 800 meter Corsair for example, and how far it is if it fills the space from 0 to 1000 meters, you can use it to help you get the range. Overall, I have to say I surprisingly did not miss the rangefinder a lot, but again the ranges we shoot at on the current maps are not that high. Once firefights at 1000 meters and above become more common, proper rangefinding will be more important, and then a real rangefinding reticle will be needed, I think. Now, changes were also made to the spotting system. If a target is spotted by a friendly tank, not by your own crew, it will only show up on the minimap, but not get the name tag, at least not in realistic battles. Still, the name tags show up a lot, and more than they did in some older versions of the test, like when I tested the PT-7. That is of course still work in progress, and I do hope and expect the name tags to get reduced in realistic battles. In my personal opinion, they are not needed at all in realistic, and I would love it if they would be removed completely. Spotted enemies showing up on the minimap is enough to make scouting viable. But I would also like to see binoculars introduced into the game to replace the name tags. Tank commandos were usually issued with binoculars, and those binos usually had a range-finding reticle as well. Of course, currently we can use the gun sight to get a closer look at something, but the gun sight was never meant to be used to scan for targets. Its field of view is too small, and of course it is fixed to the gun and can therefore not be used to scan a larger area effectively. So I would like it to see real binoculars. And I think they would replace the spotting system in realistic mode very well, and would at the same time be a simpler way to introduce a ranging help. After all, in a lot of cases ranging was done by the commander, not the gunner, and a lot of tanks did not have range-finding reticles within the gun sight, only the commander had one. So introducing just historical gun sights alone would prove insufficient anyway to provide all tanks with range-finding reticles. So the commander's binoculars will be needed in realistic battles sooner or later in any case. Well, moving on, another new thing from the Saturday test was the option to repair more modules than just the tracks on the tank in the field. It was specifically stated though that this is only a test, so it may not stay in the game in this form. So a few modules like gun barrels and breech and turret drives can be repaired to minimal functionality, not completely, in the field. Keep in mind that in this version a completely disabled gun barrel or gun breech does prevent you from shooting. Repairing takes about 3 to 4 minutes. Now that worked in realistic battles too, but I think in realistic battles in the future it is more likely that you will need to return to the base to do any repairs, just like you have to return to the airfield to repair in the aircraft part of the game. But on the other hand, since this field repair is only to minimal operational level and you have to return to the base for full repairs, it might stay in realistic battles in this way as well. Not much to say about it yet, until there is more information. Now, on to one of the more controversial changes that were made to realistic battles last week. Again, keep in mind that those are tests and may not show up like this in later versions of the game. In the current version of realistic battles, some tanks are allowed to respawn once. For example, the T-34-85, the Su-85 and also the T-44. Now, the idea is of course to help medium and light tanks out versus heavier tanks. I have to say, I personally am not a big fan of respawns in realistic mode, and mediums and light tanks are my most used tanks, and I am as of yet not convinced that they need any help. Anyway, I do see that limited respawn system has its advantages, so I think I will just tell you what the upsides and downsides of this is in my opinion, and let you decide what you would prefer. Let's start with the upsides. There is of course the extra value for mediums and lights, but in my opinion much more important is that such a limited respawn system often allows tanks to be placed closer to their historic placement than without it, something that a lot of people asked for. To give you a simple example from the current test, the Panther version A, which is the second version of the Panther by the way, not the first version is the D, has currently the same battle rating than a T-34-85. Of course, those battle ratings are subject to change, but right now they are the same for those two tanks. Now the tanks are historically somewhat close to each other. They entered service within a few months of each other, the Panther version A being a little earlier. Now if you compare the two tanks, the T-34 has a better mobility, but the Panther is not bad at that either with its up to 700 horsepower engine. But other than that, the Panther is clearly superior. Its frontal armor beats that of the Tiger, and the 75L70 has a far better penetration than the T-34's 85mm cannon. So from a balancing point of view, it would most likely present a problem when those two tanks have the same battle rating as they do in the current version of the test. However, if you change the tank's battle rating to be further apart to take the Panther's superiority into account, the matchup is less historically correct, which bothers a lot of people. Now, I have chosen this example because on Saturday I actually had a 2 vs 2 shortly before the server went down. 2 Panther vs 2 T-34-85 with respawn. And it seemed to be a balanced match. We won, but it was close. If the T-34s would not have had respawns, it would have been a steamroll. Now, that's of course just one match and you need many more to get a proper idea of the balancing, but at least in that match it worked well for those two tanks. Of course, it needs to be carefully considered which tank gets respawns and which one does not. Panther A vs T-34-85 with respawns works well. What works somewhat less well is if you put up a Panther version G versus a T-44 with respawns, and since the T-44 has respawns, this happens currently. However, there is one thing you have to keep in mind before you start another Russian bias witch hunt, though I know some of you will do that anyway, no matter what I say. The thing is that the game only matches Panther G and T-44 up the way because in the current set of tanks there is no higher German medium tank than the Panther G. The T-44 does have a higher battle rating than the Panther G. As a matter of fact, the T-44 has the same battle rating than the Tiger B with Henschel turret. Again, those ratings are not final, of course. But if the rating stays like this in the final game, I expect the T-44 is more likely to go up against the Panther F, which has a better turret armor and therefore reduces a weak point of the original Panther in a head-to-head engagement, and even against the Panther II in a lot of cases. Anyway, that is one of the downsides and the things that worry me about this system. I think it's going to be hard to balance. Respawn or not makes a huge difference. It's not a subtle way to balance a tank, and it amplifies other balancing problems the tank in question might have. It also makes a difference if the tank is top tier in a battle or low tier, something we can currently not really test because of the relatively small number of different tanks in each test. So if the respawn stays, we have to take a closer look at this later on. Also, the respawn might increase the impact player efficiency has on the game. If a good medium tank player gets 2 lives, he obviously has a bigger impact on the game. Though this also needs some more testing to find out if it is really true and if it is a bad or a good thing. Now another thing is, I actually enjoyed how not having any respawns basically opened up a new area of the map to flank through. On Kuban, for example, you could drive all around the map if the enemy team neglected one side of the map and attack them from the rear, without having to worry that a tank might respawn behind you while you're doing that, and not having to feel bad because for a while you are inside the enemy spawn area. Though larger realistic battle maps in the future might be too big to pull that trick effectively anyway. Another often mentioned downside is that it enables a person to go for a revenge kill, since he now knows from where he was killed and can go hunt specifically for the person that shot him. That's something I would prefer to only see in arcade. Though that works both ways, and I have gotten kills simply by waiting for someone to do just that. So, to summarize, the upside of limited respawn is to give medium and light tanks more value, and more importantly, as an option to enable more realistic matchups by giving weaker tanks of the area 2 lives. And the downsides in my opinion is that I think it will be hard to balance and might lead to some balancing problems, and there is the possibility for revenge kills. So what do you guys think, respawns or not? Overall, I have to say I still don't like the idea of respawns in realistic battle modes a lot. However, I'm not as opposed to it as I originally was, and I am certainly willing to test it some more and see in which direction it goes. Also, it does kind of benefit me, since I do prefer medium and light tanks over heavies. And well then, that was a look at the closed beta from Saturday's test. And that's it for this video. As always, I hope it was entertaining, thanks for watching, and maybe I'll see you next time.